So we're talking a lot about being known, which is really about intimacy, I think. I referenced a study done released earlier this year by Cigna, that showed that 54% of Americans believe that no one really knows them, and those numbers are higher with younger generations. And of course, that's just a cry for intimacy, right? It's a longing, an ache down deep to be known, to be loved, to have intimate connections with people, to be truly loved. Not too long ago, my wife Ellen got me Amazon Echo, and I was feeling kind of lonely one day, and I said, "Alexa, do you love me?" And she said, "I don't have human love figured out yet, but I've been listening to Barry White nonstop, and I've learned it's my first, my last, my everything." I mean, besides just feeling utterly rejected, I thought, well, actually, Alexa, there's some profundity there as well. I don't really have human love figured out. I don't think most of us do. We find out, with all the wreckage of our own lives, how little we really know about it. And yet, I think there's this sense in each of us that it's really, really important. It is sort of that first, that last, that everything. And that's very true from the spiritual standpoint in terms of the way Christianity thinks about human love and intimacy and being known. And that's what we want to think about this morning. So the ancient Christian leader, the Apostle Paul, wrote a letter. In some ways, it was a love letter to a group of people that he knew really well, the Ephesians. He'd spent a lot of time there helping to build that church, and he's away now and writing this letter to him. It's a very intimate letter, and the segment we're going to look at this morning that was just read for us is a prayer. And we learn a lot about real intimacy through this prayer. First of all, the doorway to it. Secondly, the depths of it. Thirdly, the dysfunction in it. And finally, the destiny for it. So let's spend some time in each of those. First of all, the doorway to it. Now, as I mentioned, this is a prayer, and prayer is, it's inherently an intimate thing. I think it's one of the reasons why if you're not as familiar, I'm paid to pray, as they say, but if you're not as familiar with prayer, you're very uncomfortable with it in public. And that's because I think we just sense it's intimate. And Paul begins by saying, "I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name." Now, I want you to notice some wording there, because you might think, okay, this is a very intimate thing, and it's a very distinctly religious thing, prayer. And yet what he's saying right up front is this is actually something that is very human about us. It includes everyone. When you go before the Father, from whom every family, not just the Christian ones, but every family in heaven and earth derives its name. And when you hear name in the Bible, it's really talking about identity. That is, every single human being, we come to know ourselves in connectivity with the God of heaven and earth. And prayer is, in essence, an invitation to come to know that one true God. It's saying, come explore intimacy, real intimacy. Because prayer on the one hand, it's very basic. It's really just talking to God. If you don't know how to pray, just start by just sharing with God what is on your heart, because he really is concerned about that. He's interested in it. So it's very basic. On the other hand, it's incredibly mysterious and profound. Medical doctor turned minister, Martin Lloyd-Jones, said prayer is beyond any question the highest activity of the human soul. And you sense that, I think, that intimacy, that power and profundity to prayer when you engage. The other thing I want you to notice right off the bat, though, is he says, "I kneel before the Father." Now, we might think today there's nothing of that because kneeling seems to go hand in hand with prayer. But in this day, kneeling really was the exception. Standing up probably was the most common posture for prayer. Kneeling was unusual in the Bible, interestingly, and it tends to connote a sense of submission, that you are bowing before the one that you're entering into this intimate conversation with. So, if you this morning are new to Christianity, not really sure what you believe, prayer is a great place to start. It is that invitation to prayer. And it's just opening up to God with where you are. He meets us exactly where we are. But make no mistake about it, that you're entering through a doorway that is eventually going to lead to you bowing before him, because he is the King of heaven and earth. And it's like a relationship, every other relationship we've known, and it's unlike every other relationship in that regard. So this is the first thing we notice just about entering in through this doorway. But notice also the language of intimacy in this prayer. I pray that out of his glorious riches, before I go into that, the word Father, which we just had in the previous verse. Father is an incredible, I know for some of you, Father makes you shudder because you've had bad experiences in your life, but think of the perfect Father, the one who made you, the one who knows you better than anyone else, the one who loves and cares for you in ways that you don't even realize. His Father is an incredibly intimate word, and it's used 8 times in this letter that Paul wrote to the Ephesians. And it's this Father, he says, that adopted us. It's like the world left us out in the streets, and God rescued us. He adopted us. He actually not only adopted us, but he made us his heirs of all the glorious riches in heaven. We're his heirs now. He's welcomed us into his household, and he gives us the freedom of access to come to him just as we are. Father, it's incredible. But also notice that the language of intimacy throughout the prayer, that he says, I pray that out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being. Inner being. The deepest part of you. You know it intuitively that there's something that the exterior part of you, as much time and energy as we spend making ourselves look better on the outside, we know that pales by comparison to the deepest inner part of you. And God says, I'm so concerned about that I want to go there. I want to bring my riches, the wealth of all that I am, into that place. It's incredibly intimate where this prayer goes. And you also sense the intimacy of God in this prayer in how he goes about expressing himself. That God himself wants to be there. He's not just sending you truth, but he wants to go there and bring the truth of who he is. And listen to the language. It's like Paul is ahead of himself emotionally. His emotions are ahead of his ability to express himself. He doesn't have the capacity to gather it into language what he's talking about. He said, if you get this, he says, this love that goes down deep into your being, he says, you would know, verse 19, this love that surpasses knowledge. You would know something that surpasses knowledge. He said, I want you to know this, but you can't really know it fully. You can't contain it because he can't be contained. And so it is a prayer full of intimacy. Do you know that intimacy in your life? It's ultimate intimacy. In one sense, every other form of intimacy. I think it's why you can get to know a person in your own experience and feel like you know them, and then you get to know them more deeply, and you feel like there's a sense in which intimacy is elusive at the human level, because we were created, for ultimate intimacy, to be enjoyed with our Creator God. And yet there is a parallel in every human relationship, right? You know how it is when you're talking to someone and you think you're connecting, and then you notice their eye starts to drift beyond you, and you think, what's going on here? And then they keep doing that. Have you ever had a conversation with someone like that? Hopefully it's not me. But you're going, wait a minute, we were talking, but now you're actually more interested in something or someone over there. With God, he gives us his undivided attention. He goes to the deepest, most inner parts of us. And it's a kind of knowledge that, humanly speaking, nothing can compare with. All right. The doorway into this. But, we talked about how prayer is the way that you begin to open that door and enter in. But it's very important before we move on, notice that you can't do that by yourself. I mean, sure, we can have our own individual prayer times, and absolutely we should on a daily basis throughout the day. I mean, the Apostle Paul talked about praying without ceasing. So there's a sense in which it's almost like oxygen. You're breathing in the rhythms of prayer, but it's always together with other people in community. The main subject of the book of Ephesians is the church, this new community that has been formed from the fabric of humanity that exists by God's grace and love in Jesus for his glory. And so he says in verse 21 in this doxology, to him be glory where? In the church, not in individuals, in the church. And he said that this love should be enjoyed together with, verse 18, all of the Lord's holy people. It doesn't mean people who've got their lives together. Holy means people who are set apart for God's purposes. It's really a technical spiritual term. It's not something we've done. It's something God has done to us if you've come to him by going through that doorway and engaging with him in faith. So it's absolutely essential that we do this together in community. Are you building community? See, the problem is when we begin to feel a lack of intimacy in our life, it tends to breed isolation in us. It tends to cause us to peel off by ourselves, psychologically or otherwise. The Bible is constantly saying community is essential and it's a discipline. You have to push yourself out of isolation into integration with God's people. And then you begin to experience more and more humanly of that reality of intimacy that we only get an approximation of in this life.